Hello, welcome to today's social work question and answer. You had questions, I have answers for you, and it's been a while since we've done one of these, and so I feel like we have a lot to talk about. My credentials before we get started, why should you listen to me? You don't have to, up to you. But hi, my name is Anna. I am 24 years old. I have both my BSW and my MSW. I got my bachelor's of social work from the University of Alabama back in 2021. That used to be so recent. I used to be like, oh, I just graduated with my bachelor's. No, 2021 is when I got my bachelor's of social work, and then I did an advanced standing program through Fordham University for my MSW, which I graduated with in 2022. My BSW field placement was in an elementary school. My MSW field placement was in a youth correctional center, juvenile detention center, and my very first post-grad job was continuing on in a juvenile detention center, a different one than I interned at, but the same position, until about a year and a half ago, whenever I quit that job, fled that job, and interviewed and got a position as a pediatric medical social worker at a children's hospital. I work on a cardiac floor, both in an ICU and a step-down unit up till discharge setting, and somehow I've now been at that job for almost 18 months. We're about 2 weeks away from it being a full year and a half, which also is crazy because it seems like I just got that. And then I also make YouTube videos. I've been making these since my last semester of my BSW, and so we have graduating from undergrad, we have choosing an MSW program, we have all of grad school vlogged, lots of social work educational videos like sprinkled throughout there. We have graduating my MSW, getting my first post-grad job, starting and like transitioning into a social worker instead of a social work student, finding my new job, interviewing for that, adjusting to that, and things I've learned along the way. So there's a lot of social work content on this channel, but then I also just share my life, my regular life outside of social work as well. And that's a little bit of who I am. If any of that information was new to you, subscribe so that you can join our little community over here. As always, I feel like you guys pick the themes of these question and answer videos just because I never know like what questions I'm going to get, and somehow I feel like it always is like 2 or 3 main central themes that people are wondering whenever I'm filming a certain video, which I just think is cool. Like, it's like the things that are on your mind that we get to talk about. Question number 1. When you were searching for an MSW program, what were your top priorities? These will vary a little bit person to person, but also I feel like there's some main things that you will take into consideration. The top things that I took into consideration, number 1 was cost, number 2 was location, and then number 3 was the curriculum itself. Cost, I feel like, is pretty straightforward. Just there are ranges of prices that you can pay for tuition for MSW programs, and then also taking into account like how long of an MSW program you're going into, whether you're doing a full 2 years or if you got your bachelor's of social work and then are doing a sped up 1-year program. I will say cost, I started thinking about a little bit more after I got accepted to different MSW programs, because I definitely applied to several thinking like, oh, maybe I could get a graduate assistantship, maybe I could get a scholarship of some sort, see like what kind of financial aid I may qualify for. And there definitely were some that I got accepted to that became immediate no's whenever I knew like what my final cost that I would actually be paying was. Columbia University, number 1 off the list that I'm thinking of. University of Denver was another one that I got into, and it just ended up being like so very expensive. So that was number 1. Number 2 being location. There are online options, which I ended up doing an online option. I also was entering into my MSW whenever we were still like very freshly post-pandemic. We weren't even post-pandemic. We were like still in the pandemic. And so I was looking at either places that had in-person programs that were operating in person or places that had more established online programs. I feel like when I specifically was applying, I was being very careful about it because there were lots of programs at that time that had no established online program but were currently online or like trying to start up an online program. And I knew I didn't really want to enter into a program as they were like figuring a lot of things out. I wanted them to either be online and like established online or be offering in-person opportunities. With my online classes, I still was able to do an in-person field placement, which kind of takes me into the last part, which was curriculum, was something that I really thought about, just because you'll see common themes but also lots of differences in MSW programs as you're looking for them. Some are like very strict and rigid of like, these are exactly the classes you'll be taking. Some are more loose in the like, okay, these are the required classes, but then you have this many spaces that you get to fill up as you choose, like as you want to, with classes that interest you. Some have like specializations in their MSWs where you're kind of on like a certain track, and all of the more fluffy classes that you take will be like along a certain theme. So there's no like right or wrong answer with that, but mine ended up being one that I was a bit more free. I had my like core classes that I had to take, and then I got to choose my electives from there. But something that is super important whenever you're picking your MSW program, I think it is so important to have a program that will help you find a field placement and or find a field placement for you. Both my undergrad program and my master's program found my field placements for me, which relieves a lot of stress as a student. I know there are lots of programs also that will make students do like outreach calls and students find their locations, and I don't like social work work education trending towards that direction, because it is really nice whenever like your school has an established relationship with an agency and it's just more structured that way, and also you're more guaranteed to have a field placement that way. I will say that like having your school pick your field placement for you maybe means that you don't end up like exactly in your top choice of where you want to be, but also like you could do the thing that you're placed in and all of a sudden the type of social work you want to do you realize like is changing. Like you're not locked in wherever your field placement is, and you're getting good social work experience regardless. So not every program finds your field placement for you. That's something that me personally I just found to be very important. Speaking of MSWs, you can probably just like recite this along with me, and if you can, that's so exciting. But I am so thrilled to talk about the sponsor of today's video, which is MSW Helper. You may have heard about them recently because I talked about them recently, and they are always in a link in my description down below because I just want them to be so easy access to any social work student, prospective social work student, prospective social worker that is on this channel. MSW Helper is the only personal statement editor that is by social workers for social workers. MSW Helper is specified to social work grad applications, so they know what social work admissions committees are looking for and how you can sell yourself as the prime candidate to be a social work student at that institution. Their team understands the nuances of the social work profession and is able to help you craft your strengths and your experiences using social work lingo that will really stand out in a personal statement. I know how valuable you would be to an MSW program. You know how valuable you would be to an MSW program, and your writing skills should not be the barrier in the way that keeps an admissions committee from seeing how valuable you will be. Your personal statement is the one part of your application that you can use to really sell yourself. You can't change your GPA, you can't change your experience level, but you can sell yourself in your personal statement. The social workers at MSW Helper have gone through the admissions process themselves and have now devoted their lives to becoming experts on it so that they can empower future social workers to get into the program that will educate them to be the best social workers that they can be. After searching for your perfect MSW program and applying to it, you do not want to leave any chance that you will get the "we regret to inform you that" letter. Those are no fun to get. I've gotten one of them. I know lots of my friends have gotten them. MSW programs can be competitive, and so utilizing all of the resources that are available to you and can be beneficial to you, I would highly encourage you to do. Beyond personal statement editing services, MSW also has free resources on their website, and they do webinars, so there's lots of free information available to you as well that it truly cannot hurt to fill your brain with. Give yourself the best chance that you can as you're applying to your MSW program. Make sure to go browse MSW Helper's website so you can see what services they have that will be beneficial to you as you are working to get into the MSW program that will transform you into a social worker. Writing skills should not be a reason for anyone to be blocked from becoming a social worker. Click on MSW Helper's link down in the description below of this video and also every video that I ever post. And thank you MSW Helper for sponsoring this portion of the video. What are your best words of wisdom to navigate becoming a social worker versus being a social work student? You know, in Inside Out, whenever they like send memories to like long-term memory, and it's like the rows and rows of things, and they kind of have to like decide which ones are core memories and get to stay and which ones like get shot out into the like way back. I feel like that is the first months of you having a job as a social worker, just that your brain has so much like information that you've been learning and like discussions you've been having and thoughts about the profession that you've learned like in social work school, and as you're in your job, like some will be useful to you and some won't necessarily be useful to you just because it is such a broad field and depending on what you do. And I feel like the first months like post grad in a new social work job, you start getting a grasp of like, okay, maybe these things take a back burner right now, and then like these theories I'm gonna dive even deeper into than I did in school because I can see how relevant they will be like in this job. It's kind of this balance of like molding yourself from this like perfect little sphere of a social work student into like some specific shape of your new job, which can kind of feel weird in the like process of that. And I also think mentally it can feel strange to be like, oh, like I'm the one making decisions now, I'm the one like assessing and doing interventions, because you're so used to being a student. And so with that, never feel afraid to ask questions. You can be in a job for a very long time and can still be asking questions because you're not going to know everything, and everything changes and like every day is different. And I think when you first graduate, it can feel like, oh, like if I seem like I don't know what I'm doing, like I need to present myself as if like I know everything and like I'm confident. And I think the longer you're in a job, the more you realize that like everyone is discussing all of the time like how to be the best social worker and like different social work interventions and how to improve the place that you're working at and everything. And so jumping from being a student into being part of those discussions is really valuable because like you have your brain knowledge that you're coming with and you don't quite yet have the experience, but you're gaining that. And so being open to learning even after graduating, I think is like my best piece of advice, my best word of wisdom. And the fact that being open to learning and like soaking in all this new information doesn't mean that you didn't learn anything or that like you're behind behind somehow because you don't already know that all. It's just the fact that like it is a huge learning curve, learning jump going from being a student into being like a social worker in a job, and that is very valuable, and that is like the perfect place for you to be in. And knowing that it's going to happen, I think, can help you prepare for it too. So your learning does not stop whenever you become a social worker, but you can up your confidence and knowing like you are prepared for your job. They took you on knowing who you are. Do your best, feel good about your work, and don't be afraid to ask for help, because it would be weird if you didn't need any help whenever you're first starting out in a new job in a new career post-grad. What are some ways to explore macro social work while getting an MSW? Keep up with politics, follow along what like the NASW or different social work organizations are doing in the world, because then you can kind of see what like macro level social workers are currently working on. Any organization that you get in is kind of a taste of being like in macro social work, whether it's social work specific or just like kind of any, maybe not any club, lots of clubs, but any like social work organization. Lots of times if you have like an agenda or things you're working on to make change, or like if you're working on improving policy in the school of social work, whatever it may be that you're doing, that's kind of a taste into macro social work. I think just really like finding topics that interest you and kind of like deep diving into them is honestly introducing yourself into macro social work, since macro social work is a lot of focusing on like issues and policies and like the overarching big groups of things. And so just kind of knowing what's happening can be a little taste of like the macro world while you're getting your social work degree, even whenever you're not like actively working in a macro social work position. Does your specialization in your MSW program matter in the long run? I would say no. I think specializations can be good to see on paper, like just to have that kind of like padding if you want to, but the requirement for most jobs or like licensing is just to have an MSW. So once you get an MSW, like it's cool if a lot of your electives are focused on like a similar topic and you're kind of becoming like much more knowledgeable in that topic and like devoted to that topic, but that doesn't mean that you're locked in there. Like maybe a specialization could get you a more foot in the door if it's like a super niche place that you're trying to work in, but it's not necessarily gonna like keep you from making a career change in social work and going to like somewhere different that you're working. Can be valuable if you're interested in like what your specialization is in, I would say, but social work has transferable skills. I feel like that's a phrase that's always thrown around, just meaning that the skills that you do as a social worker in one position can be taken and put into a different position, even if that position is doing a different thing. Like a lot of the skills are the same, and so I wouldn't say a specialization pigeonholes you only into that place for the entire rest of your social work career, but if it's something that you're interested in and you want to take classes about and you're going to be more interested in those classes and you think that that's like an area that you want to work in the future, then there's probably no harm in it. I did not technically have a specialization. The way that my MSW program was set up, they had like 4 categories of classes. Let's see if I remember. They had individuals, groups and families, community, maybe policy was the 4th one. Yeah, and policy. So you had to take one class in each of these 4 things, but then there was also 4 other slots that you could fill up with whatever you wanted. So mine ended up being that the other 4 slots I filled up with individuals. Maybe it was individuals and families, and then groups was by itself. I don't remember. But I filled up with like the most micro one of those classes, and I liked the way that that was set up, because even though I was most interested in the micro classes and like taking those classes, it still forced me to get out of my box and learn everything too, like, and still take a community class and still take a policy class, which is important. I think that could be a downside of a specialization, is if it is keeping you from taking like a broad array of classes, but as long as you get like a little bit of something, which I think you're required to like in MSW curriculum requirements, then you're probably good on that front. Is social work a career where you can change what you want to do, start at something like nursing homes and then go to schools, or vice versa? Yes. And a lot of it will be just like marketing yourself in interviews, and there's a fuzzy, and figuring out how to like portray and sell those transferable skills that you had at your one position to the next one. I, for one, went from juvenile correction to medical, pediatric medical, which is a pretty big shift. And I feel like that's very common in social work. Like even whenever new people get hired now at the hospital, I feel like it's rare that they're getting hired like from medical settings. Like we'll be like, oh, like what's their history? Like where did they come from? And it's like very common in social work of like, oh, they spent like this many years in child protection, this many years in hospice, this many years doing risk assessments. Like it's just like various different things, and that's like very common. So yes, can move around. Just have to be brave enough to do so. Moving a little bit into like my social work experience. Did you prefer working at a hospital or a correctional facility? I've like touched on this before in previous videos, and I feel like it sounds kind of funny whenever I word it this way. My heart was so in the juvenile correctional facility that I was in. And that's not to say that my heart is not like in where I'm currently working. Like it definitely is. Like I care about my clients and their families and everything, but But as far as like true like passion, like I feel it down to my bones, like all of that, that was juvenile corrections for me. And I think that is part of why I could not stay there, was because like it truly would like chew me down to the bone, like a little chicken drumstick. Like that was me in juvenile corrections, because I was so in it and I was so affected and am still so passionate about it. Whereas my current job now allows me to have more of like a work-life balance, both like physically and mentally and emotionally. So like under a lot of different settings, I would have loved to stay at the job that I previously had in juvenile corrections, but not at that place, not with those people in charge, not with the policies that were in place, because it kind of just like forced me to be a cog in the system. And I really did not want to be a cog in a system that like so deeply down to my spirit does not sit well with me. So I guess maybe like work setting wise, like the clients, the teenage boys that I had back at my old job, I would work with like for a whole entire career, but not in the role that I was in. Whereas like currently it is a good steady role, but like my heart is still with my old clients a little bit. Like it is with my new clients, but just like my passion projects is much more in the like justice system, injustice system than the hospital. Don't take that wrong. I hope you know like where I'm coming from. What parts of working in medical social work did you not expect when first starting? This is about to sound like a little bit bitter. Just a little bit. I feel like medical social work can be so multifaceted, and I've kind of explained this before, but like there are case managers in hospitals. My role is different than a case manager, like in the pediatric setting. Like I'm not doing things with like prescriptions and discharges, like the nitty gritty, but I more like step in whenever there's psychosocial factors that are affecting those things, whether it's like finances, family dynamics, like just various things like that, child protection, anytime that comes up. And so with that, it is so multifaceted because every family needs or doesn't need very different things. And then also with the like amount of different roles that there are in a children's hospital, some families don't need like me to step in and like help as much as like other families do, which then is part of why like every day is different. No days are the same. I'm always learning new things. But I feel like where the bitterness comes, what I was about to say, like something I didn't expect, is that I kind of feel like in the role that I happen to be in, whenever things go wrong, it's like somehow my fault. And whenever things go right, it's like not at all due to anything I did. And perception wise, like whenever things go smoothly, I don't think like my hand in it helping them go smoothly is necessarily seen as much as like when things go wrong, even if it's entirely out of my control, I feel like it falls on me perception wise, even if it like doesn't actually fall on me, like even if I couldn't have done anything different. And so something that I didn't expect was just like having to speak up for myself often about like what I can do, what I cannot do, what I like literally physically don't have the power to do, and like how things work, what social workers' role is like in the interdisciplinary team. I would say it's almost like not only do I do my work, but I also like am vocal sometimes about like what I'm doing, just so people can like see it a little more, if that makes sense. Like that's just like not something I really expected, because it's a bit different than the previous role that I had. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? How has that changed since you graduated? When I graduated, I could not see 5 years in the future. I had no idea. Part of this was career wise, and part of this also was like with my partner wise, because when I graduated, Zach was taking a gap year within the intent of going to med school. And so that whenever he was applying meant that like location wise, we could have ended up anywhere about a year after I graduated. And so that is part of why I got my first post-grad job, since it was through like I'd interned with them and then a position opened up at a different facility but under the same people. And so I took that job partly because I already knew like how to do it, so that was nice to have like the sense of stability, partly because it would allow me to work while I was getting my LMSW, my associate license, and then also partly because I was thinking I was only going to be in Atlanta for like 1 more year, and I felt like it would be a lot to try to get a new job and be there for less than a year. So really my goal was to be at my post-grad job for a year, and then I had no idea what was going to happen. And then it was probably like 6-7 months after post-grad is whenever Zach was no longer going to med school and we were going to be staying in Atlanta, to where I was like, okay, like if I really want to get out of this job, I don't have to fit a full year here. Having like 1 year post-grad experience on a resume is really valuable, but I was like, if I'm starting to look and I'm able to get a job before having that 1 year post-grad experience, especially because by that time I'd had my associate license, I was like, then I can do it, because I feel more confident that like I'll be able to be in that position for longer. It wouldn't just be like 2 months and then we're moving to med school. And so that's when I quit my job and got this new job, knowing that we'd be in Atlanta. Not still for sure exactly what the plan was, but this past fall, Zach started a PhD program. So we're kind of here for the long haul now. So right when I graduated, I had like no 5-year plan. I had like a 12-month plan kind of, and even that didn't happen as it was meant to. But looking 5 years from now, I wouldn't say I have a plan, but just like visions for the next 5 years. 5 years from now, I will be 29. 29. 29. That's crazy. I don't know if I can go that far in advance. It's just like upcoming career goals that are gonna get me to the next 5 years. Next year is when I'll be able to get my clinical license. So that is definitely a plan of mine, is to get my clinical license, and I will be at this job at least until then. I don't see myself leaving like right afterwards or anything, but I at least like, I know I'll be at this job until then because I get clinical hours when I'm at this job. And so it doesn't make sense to leave it before getting my clinical license. Again, I don't have like any plans in my head of leaving, but just like, I know for sure I will be here until I get my clinical license, which I'm thinking will be next like summer, fall 2025 is probably when that'll happen for me. And then I'm at least like free to think of other things if I want to. I could see myself retiring from this job. I could see myself like going PRN or something like that if it becomes financially available to me, or like a more like not a full 40 hours a week position in the hospital. If that becomes financially available to me, which it probably won't in the next few years, but maybe in the next 5 years it could. There are like a couple promotion opportunities that could happen in my job. Like there's team leads that exist. I mean, if there's like a different, I'm not opposed, like if there's a different role that just like really calls to me within the hospital, like I could always internally transfer. So I really don't know. Like I could see myself being in the exact same position that I am now in 5 years, or I could see myself being somewhere different in the hospital. I don't know if I see myself being somewhere out of the hospital. I feel like it would surprise me if that would happen in the next 5 years. I do think I'm planning on like sticking where I'm at, but maybe finding like some variation in that to like best fit me as I'm growing in the next 5 years. Because by the time I'm 29, theoretically, I will have, that makes me feel old. I'm gonna like go into crisis thinking about that. The fact that 5 years from now I'd be 29. Theoretically though, I would then have had my clinical license for 4 years. So I'd be like an LCSW with 4 years of experience being an LCSW and 7 years of social work experience total, which is crazy. I'm sure when I'm 29, I can like look back to right now and be like, she had no idea. But I feel like I'm kind of open to anything because I'm fine where I'm at. I could see myself wanting something different. I could see myself like growing more in some way. I don't know in which direction, but growing more. So kind of just, we'll see. Oh, this question kind of, I just talked about a little bit. Will you get your clinical license? Yes, I plan on it. A little discussion here that will come in another question. How early do you recommend to start studying for the licensing exam? I think it a little bit depends on how close to grad school you are. If you're just like straight coming out of grad school, then there's less of the like actual knowledge that you need to fill your brain with because a lot of it is probably fresh, but you still need to kind of familiarize yourself with the test structure, like the way they ask questions and that kind of thing. I took my exam 5 months out from grad school, and I probably started studying about 3 months before my exam. It was hard for me to begin studying before I knew the date that my exam was going to be, just because it felt so like arbitrary. But once I had the date that my exam was going to be, that's when I really amped up the studying. If you've been out of school for longer, then maybe you want to start studying sooner than that for your exam. States do it differently. I guess I could explain this. States do it differently. Georgia requires you to have your MSW degree absolutely finished before you even send in an application to get approved to sit for the exam. So there's a few months delayed after you graduate. Some states have it to where you can have your MSW in progress whenever you apply to get approved to sit for the exam. So some people can sit for the exam while they're still in grad school. Mine was delayed because Georgia doesn't do that. If you start studying too soon, I feel like you run the risk of just like overloading your brain a little bit. When like, if you're getting a social work education, then you're getting like the social work instinct and the social work knowledge and the social work terminology. Like you're going to know stuff on the exam. But maybe like, I feel like 3 months sounds like a good, sounds like a good time frame. Was the licensing test difficult? How many questions was it? And what types of questions were on there? Everyone's answer will probably be different about if it was difficult. It is a long test. Taking long tests is difficult. 4 hours long. That is difficult in and of itself. The way the questions are worded sometimes, how should I say this? As social workers, we are like trained to think of all of the details and to ask more in-depth questions and to like make connections and to read between the lines and everything. And the test does not want you to do that because it's a multiple choice test, so you really can't. So I think where the test can become difficult for a lot of people outside of just like knowing vocabulary, knowing terminology, that kind of thing, is that it'll ask you a question and you start being like, oh, but what if this happened? And what's their history here? And like, have we already done this thing, this thing, this thing? And like, you can't do all of that. Like you can't think about the what ifs and like all of the extra details. You have to really just focus on what it is saying in the question only. And then it's like kind of this made up world where only the details they give you are the details that exist, which is different than when you're doing regular social work, because when you're doing regular social work, it's with real people who have like huge background stories that are all so critical to like their current presenting problem and like change how you intervene and assess and everything like that. But in the test, you can't do all of that. So it's like you can only take the details that it gives you. And I think that social workers tend to really start to overthink the test, because that's what we're trained to do, is like come up with all these details and know the history and be creative and all of these things. But for the multiple choice test, you can't do that. So I feel like that's where it can be really difficult sometimes, is that like you have to practice the test, because you can know all the knowledge and not know like the structure of the test, which there's definitely flaws in that, but also I don't know how to fix them. And so to give details, tests are 4 hours long. They are 170 questions, only 150 of which are actually scored for the test, but you don't know which 20 are not scored. The 20 that are not scored are like questions that they're testing to include in future tests. So you don't know which ones those are, but you take 170 questions, only 150 count towards your score. Passing rate, the number that you need to get right to pass is different test to test. That's like when they test the questions, those 20 questions, and then start using them in tests, they find that some are more difficult and some are more easy. And so kind of the combination of all 150 questions that you're being tested on, they determine like how many are more easy and how many are more difficult, and it changes the amount that you need to get right on the test. So passing rates can be anywhere between like 93 and 110, kind of spread along that. You don't know when you're taking the test how many you need to get right. I think my test ended up being one where you needed to get 98 right, I'm pretty sure, which is like on the spectrum of things, is like a harder test, because it's harder, so they're making you not get quite as many right and you still pass. Whereas if you take a test and it ends up being that you need to get 110 to pass it, that's an easier test, because it's saying like these questions are easier, so you should be getting more of them right. I feel like people flip that sometimes. They're like, oh, I have to get 110 right, so it's a harder test. But like really, like yes, you have to get more right, but it's because they're determined to be easier questions from when they test the questions. Sorry, that was more in depth than you were asking. My bad. The things that I use to study for the test, which I do have a licensing video that is quite helpful. I just watched it before filming this to refresh my memory. I used the Dawn Apgar practice test and read the Dawn Apgar book. The Dawn Apgar book is good content-wise, and the practice test is good for getting your brain used to that structure of question. I did note in that video that I just watched that there were some terms that came up on the test that were not in the Dawn Apgar book, but also like you learn stuff in grad school. I use the Agents of Change YouTube videos, both for concept explanations that they have, and they also do practice questions, which can be really useful. But my #1 recommendation was Savvy Social Work Prep. The way that she did practice questions and explained answers and really simplified things was the most helpful to me. There is another social work prep person named Phil Luttrell, which I heard a lot of people practicing with. To me personally, he went so far complex overthinking to get to an answer, and because my brain already does that, I needed someone to like help me rein it back in and just like break it down to like very simple concepts. And to me, that was Savvy Social Work Prep. Some things that like she pointed out that were kind of game changing to me was things like focus on the verb of the question. Like if a question says, quick little background of a client, how can you assist this client, or something like that. If the verb is assist, then it's saying that like your answer is going to be an intervention. It's not going to be an assessment, even though in your brain you might be thinking like, oh, I need to assess this client, or like something like that. Like the question is written in a way where it's saying like you've already done that basically, and you're on to assisting them. So any question answer that's not an intervention, you can cross off. Like things like that became just like test taking strategies that were really helpful to me in the end. So I definitely recommend Savvy Social Work Prep. I've not watched her since doing my licensing exam 2 years ago. I will before my clinical license, so I don't know like what she's been up to the past 2 years, but she was helpful to me. I'm not sure if I want to pursue my clinical license because I'm not currently interested in providing therapy, but everyone tells me that that is where the money is at. What are your thoughts on this dilemma? This is something that is so annoying to talk about, because every state, I feel like, perceives clinical licensure and independent licensure as social workers differently. And this is where I think some people get confused in my YouTube videos too, because they're like, what do you mean you're working towards your clinical license when you're not doing like therapy in private practice type of thing? And so not saying it's right or wrong, but just like the state that I live in, their views on social work in Georgia, and MSW is like the bare minimum is what it feels like. And LMSW doesn't mean much in Georgia. There are lots of jobs that require an MSW and don't require that person to have an associate license in Georgia. And that was true for my first postgrad job too. They did not require me to get my associate license. I just got my associate license. I think it's so important for social workers to have a license so that they have a board that they're answering to, so that if there is unethical behavior, unethical interventions, unethical treatment of clients that's going on, there is someone that social workers have to answer to. I think that's like our duty towards clients, is to be able to be held accountable. That's my thoughts on like just having a license. And so that's where I think like the associate license is so important, because you can be an associate level social worker and still need to be held accountable to a social work board. Not me pointing up like it's God, the social work board. And then in Georgia, a clinical license is something that it takes 3 years, 120 supervision hours, 3,000 working hours to qualify for, and then you have to pass the exam. At that point, you can practice social work independently, whether it is clinical private practice therapy or medical social work or hospice social work or social work in the correction center. Any social work you can do independently, whereas at an associate level, you need to be under supervision. You need to be having someone that you're bouncing cases across, that you're getting guidance from, that you're meeting with. And so in Georgia, that's where it's less of like, this is my private practice license, and it's more so like, this is my independent license as a social worker, where like I've kind of proved myself now to have the education and to have the experience to where I can practice on my own in an ethical manner, if that makes sense. That's how it's viewed in Georgia. It's like, it's an independent license. It is called LCSW, like it's a licensed clinical social worker, but that's how like my hours that I'm doing now count towards my independent license, even though it's not private practice or like direct therapy with client, because it all falls under the like social work umbrella. That's what makes most sense to me, because that's like the state that I live in. I feel like Alabama was very similar in that. Alabama was different in the sense that they have a bachelor level license, they have a master level license, and then they have your clinical independent license. But it was the same thing, was that like you were working towards your independent license. But I do think Alabama, it was much more common, encouraged, required to have your master level license whenever you were practicing. How other states are different, and I don't know exactly like state by state exactly how this works in every state, but I know, for example, like you're getting your clinical license if you are doing like clinical therapeutic interventions, like one-on-one, maybe one-on-group with clients. It's like if you're doing private practice, you get your clinical license, and if you're not doing private practice, then there's no need for you to get your clinical license. It's almost like MSW is like the gold standard, and then LCSW is just if you do therapy. That's where I think people get confused when I talk about it, is just because like those things are different state to state. So in Georgia, for me to do social work more freely, sort of, I need my LCSW. And so that's also when I was talking about the fact that I'm definitely gonna be staying at my current job until I get my LCSW, is because like I would have more options as far as jobs go once I have that LCSW, because I don't need like a direct supervisor over me who's a social worker. So there's like more broad job opportunities that I can do. So sorry, that was a lot about me. What were you asking me? Okay, yeah, I'm not sure if I want to pursue my clinical license because I'm not currently interested in providing therapy, but everyone tells me that's where the money is at. So that was some of my thoughts on the dilemma, was that it is so different state to state. I think whatever is the highest level of licensure that makes sense to you and the work you want to do, you should pursue. I think some people get stuck in not pursuing their like independent license in a place where they could and like should, because they're comfy and they don't want to take another test, but they would get a pay raise if they had that independent license. So if you are in a state that you get your clinical license to provide therapy, but you don't want to provide therapy, then I don't know if it would make sense for you to get it or not. Like, I don't know. If you feel like providing therapy is where the money is at and you don't want to give therapy, then like that's probably not a good enough reason to like give up on what you would like to do just for that. But if you live in a state where the independent clinical license is like the gold standard of social work and you have less opportunity by not having it, then I do think it's something to pursue, just because like you can have the higher license and still take a job that doesn't require it because that's what you want to do, but at least you have the opportunity to like have the highest level of license that you can. But again, like I said, that it's so different state to state, and that's like the issue of social work, is that things are so different state to state because some states just have different licensing, and so it's hard to navigate. But like I said, for me personally, I'm getting my clinical license because that's like my independent license as a social worker, to where then I am like an independent social worker, gold standard. I'm at like the highest level that I can be at. So that's why that's my goal, is to get that. But that's Georgia. I think that's all we have time for today. I feel like got into some good discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you like set me down somewhere and just listen to me ramble while, I don't know, cleaning, cooking, hanging out, going for a walk. Thank you for submitting these questions. Like, I genuinely could not do it without you. Again, make sure to subscribe before you go. Don't leave me hanging here. That'll make me so sad. But I appreciate you so much. Thank you for taking these minutes out of your day, and I'll see you next time.